Good evening, and thanks for tuning in for this special edition of In Focus on WCTV Channel 11. I'm Eric Marsh, Executive Director, and I'd like to tell people and remind people that In Focus really started a few years ago as a program called PI Live. That's very important tonight because the program that we're going to see is actually a repeat of a PI Live. Dale McConnaughay, who was with the Palladium Item and who was host of PI Live, had a chance to have a conversation with Landrum Bolling, along with Hal Gatchell, an Earlham College graduate, and Micah Summers, who at that time was an Earlham student. They all sat here in the studio and had a very nice conversation. Then a couple of years later, when Landrum had his 100th birthday, we re-aired that show, and Dale and I had a chance to do a special introduction to it. So what we're going to do is show you that introduction as well as the conversation with Landrum Bolling. In Focus will be back next week, 6 p.m. at its usual time. We'll be talking road construction with our guests Bob Warner and Greg Steens. Enjoy the special In Focus PI Live conversation with Landrum Bolling.
Hello, my name is Dale McConnaughay, Viewpoints and Public Affairs Editor at the Palladium Item, and thank you so much for joining us today, joining Eric Marsh and myself for what is something of a special edition of PI Live. Eric, we have a special birthday to celebrate today.
We do. We were fortunate enough back in April of 2011, I believe, to have Landrum Bolling spend some time here in the studio talking about his life and some of the things that he has seen, obviously very instrumental in working with President Carter and some others around some of the happenings that were going on in the Middle East. And he's obviously, as president of Earlham College, been incredibly important to this area.
Of course, Landrum Bolling is celebrating a centenarian milestone this week, and the whole community, the college, comes together to celebrate his life. Been a remarkable life, to say the least, when you consider that this gentleman came to the university, came to the college in 1948 as a political science professor, spent a quarter century as president there. But that's probably just one of the larger of many chapters of his life, which included being a diplomat, a statesman. What's fascinating about the show today, where we're joined by some Earlham College now alums, one of them was as an intern at that time, but just the range of things that he could discuss, from social media and its impact to the changes he's seen in the college and the town, to some of the more nuanced events going on in the Middle East, which of course cause him great concern.
And you know, one of the things about this particular show is it started us thinking about the idea of what has become the Legacy series, a continuation of the partnership between the Palladium Item Media Group and Whitewater Community Television. After having Landrum Bolling here, we started talking about maybe we should try a little bit more often to bring others who have had a great impact on the community in for a discussion around the table. And we've ended up talking to Mike Lopresti and Wayne Stidham.
Loretta Rush.
Loretta Rush has been another one. Bobby Plump from Milan basketball fame. We re-showed that show last week. So hopefully in the future we'll continue to do some more Legacy series shows also. But this show was just the beginning of that collaboration.
Yeah, it is. I always found it sort of fascinating because I don't think we knew exactly how we were going to accommodate. At that time, 97 years old, still up there as a way, and yet, as we recall, Landrum Bolling fielded so many things. He was on for a full, 57 minutes.
Yeah.
And he went from here, you were reminding me, because I almost forgot before we went on today, but he went from here, he's flying back off to the Middle East at 97 years old. So he was quite an active life, quite a remarkable life. Again, Jimmy Carter called him into service when he was negotiating the Camp David Accords. He knew of Landrum's great depth of knowledge and great respect that he had in the Middle East. So this show was a real honor to do. I think once we did this, we thought there are others out there that maybe don't rise quite to Landrum's scale in terms of age, certainly, but certainly an achievement they had. And I think we've done a great job of picking some of those out, and it's been one of my all-time favorite things to have done as part of the PI Live spinoff.
Yep. So we hope you enjoy this episode of PI Live.
welcome to this special taped PR Live. We have a very special guest today, and he's in town, and we wanted to take the opportunity to sit down with him, something I've had the honor of doing on several occasions in my years in Richmond, and I want to introduce him right now, Landrum Bolling, a person everybody knows, I guess, by a building out on the Earlham campus, but probably fewer, I don't know if fewer, especially among some of the young folks who weren't at school out there, have actually met.
Yes.
Somebody who I'm delighted to say I know, and I'm joined today by two folks who also have Earlham connections, who during the next approximately an hour, we're going to talk about several things Earlham related and going around the world globally. So let me introduce to my immediate right, Micah Summer, who is the Doug and Alan Bennett intern at the Palladium Item this semester. And Micah, you're an old hand at the show. You've been on here before, so welcome back.
I suppose so. Thank you.
All right. And Howard Gatchell. I call you Gatch all the time, and that's why I'm sort of lost here for what the actual the formal name is. But
Howell Gatchell.
Howell Gatchell.
That's it.
Howell is back at Earlham after 1969 graduate.
1969.
Okay.
When Landrum was president, I was a student.
All right, and you are back actually doing work after a very successful broadcast career out in California. You're back doing some work with the radio station there.
That's right. I'm helping the students out with some technical things and some administrative things, and doing a couple of jazz programs every week.
Okay, great. I had a chance when I called yesterday to hear you actually talking to me and then talking on the radio, and you do a great job. Micah, you graduate this year, I think you
That's
said.
true. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, again, let's talk somebody who I guess has spent more time at Earlham than most folks, and a little background here. First of all, Landrum, you came to Earlham what year?
I came to Earlham in 1948.
1948.
I came. I'd been abroad as a foreign correspondent in Berlin after the war, and so I came here to join the Department of Political Science, and I taught as a faculty member for 7 years, and then in 1958 they chose me to be president of Earlham. So I've served 15 years as president of Earlham. And since then, I've had a variety of other careers. I'm now have an office in Washington. I work with an international relief and development agency called Mercy Corps, which works in about 40 different countries all over the world, areas of disaster relief, and refugees from wars and that kind of thing. So I have the rather meaningless title of Director at Large. It doesn't mean anything, but I'm kind of a senior advisor on policy and program for this International Relief and Development Agency.
Well, I think a correction's in order. I don't think anything you do is meaningless. You are still quite the globetrotter. In fact, didn't you tell me you're going to Europe in a couple weeks, and you still spend a good bit of time in the Middle East?
I do go fairly frequently in the Middle East. I've been going there for 40 years. I lived for 4 years as the director of the Ecumenical Institute, which is under the direction of the University of Notre Dame up in South Bend. So that was a very fascinating chapter of my life, and I still go to that region. I spent the month of July actually in the Middle East, and I've been going every year for a long time.
Okay, and we're going to want to talk some with all that's going on in the Middle East. We're going to talk about that, but first, because we've had, I guess, in Earlham's history, a historic event this week with the naming of the 17th president of Earlham, David Dawson. Micah Gatch, what do you know about the new president?
Well, I don't know a whole lot about him. I was part of a community group that met with all 4 of the finalists that were chosen by the search committee. They had meetings with different groups, faculty, students, members of the Richmond community, and I was part of that latter group. And I was very impressed with the man. He seems to have a background that will fit Earlham very well, but the subject matter that our group dealt with was fairly limited. We were dealing with Earlham's relationship with the Richmond community, and he seems to be very well qualified to enhance that.
Great.
Which was of considerable interest to me, because when I was a student, the relationship was pretty hostile, but that was the 1960s and the Vietnam era, and I think Landrum could speak to that.
I'll never forget that period.
Well, that's why I'm so delighted that we have the two of you on here, because we're talking about really spanning generations here. But before we get into some of that, and I want to talk about that, I want to talk to Landrum about just the differences that he has seen, coming onto campus in 1948 for the first time versus what the new president sees today. It's a very, very different Earlham College and a very different Richmond, Indiana, isn't it?
Yes, well, it is. Of course, the size of Earlham has expanded somewhat. It's been more or less frozen now for several years at about 1,200 a year. When I first came here, I think there were about 600 students, and we were beginning to expand. Of course, there's been a good deal of building on the Earlham campus over these years since I first came there. And I remember how some of the actually my predecessor, Tom Jones, built, I think it was something like 10 buildings in 10 years, something like that. He built the meeting house, he built a couple of dormitories, he did various improvements on buildings. And one of the professors said to me when I became president, Landrum, keep the bulldozers off this campus for a few years. But we did build the library there after I became president. So there's been one of the things I think in terms of the program of Earlham that's very important. Earlham became more and more involved in international affairs. We have a very extensive foreign study program available to our students. We have a large number of foreign students that come to Earlham now. I think it's
one of the largest of any
one of the largest of any small liberal arts college in America. About, I don't know, 150 of our students, of 1,200, come from 40 or 50 different countries. So Earlham has become, it is a rooted Indiana institution. It belongs to this community of Richmond, but it has an outreach to the world, and it's reflected in the program of the college, and it's reflected in the student body.
And even at the same time, it's done, I think, a very good job, certainly under your presidency, and I think continuing under the subsequent presidents, the Bennett presidency most recently, of connecting very much with the community. I was looking at the community calendar. We've got a symphony and chorus concert this weekend. Mike and I are actually both involved in, but you've got a Centerville, the percussion department here is involved with Centerville on Sunday in a concert.
I'll be playing in that concert.
Are you going to be in that too? Is that right? So the tentacles, if you will, of the university are of the college are very much felt.
Very much in the music field, I think.
Yes.
We've had a lot of involvement with the community and choruses and orchestra and so on. And that's I think it's been good for both the college and the community.
Yeah. You've really brought the world to. Has it always been like that? Has it always brought people from across the country into Richmond?
I really think from my somewhat limited knowledge of the history of Earlham, I think that really flowered under Landrum's presidency, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Landrum, about the importance of that international connection and Earlham's engagement with the world, which has become such an important part of Earlham.
Well, there has been here in Richmond a very interesting program for some years of kind of sister cities arrangements. I don't know, the local people in Richmond one time made a sister city arrangement with a small city in Russia, and we got to the point where those people were invited to come and visit Richmond, Indiana, and some Richmond people went and visited the Russians in their home city. So that was Earlham people played a part of that, but this was a real civic enterprise here in Richmond. I don't know whether that's still going or not, but that was one illustration of that. And of course, we brought many speakers from various parts of the world here, and those public events are always open to the public, so that I think Earlham has been very concerned to make available special things like lectures and concerts that are open to the whole community.
And Earlham as well, correct me if I'm wrong, but the students at Earlham really have a lot of travel opportunities internationally, don't
Oh,
they?
they do, yes.
Have you traveled?
Yeah, I did both a May term and a full semester program in Mexico, along with 6 other students on that program, and it was a great experience for me. It was an incredible learning experience, learning the language and culture, and also studying sort of grassroots movements in a variety of different contexts. So that was a very rich experience for me. And we also have abroad programs in Africa, in Asia, certainly in Europe, I think in South America. I think we're sending people to all 5 continents. I
Yes.
think there's any programs in Antarctica
I think
yet.
there's something like 20 different program opportunities available to Earlham students, and they may go for short term, or they may go for a whole full semester, or maybe even longer. But I know that when I meet with alumni of Earlham, as I do from time to time, they tell me that the foreign study experiences they had was one of the most powerful education experiences of their whole lives. They said, Earlham made that possible for me, and I broadened my view of life and of people and of the political situation all over the world. So that is part of the characteristic of the college now that's, I think, very, very strongly rooted in the operations of the college.
And I know I've had the opportunity to work at a few community papers, but this is maybe the only one where when you have a story like a Japanese quake break or something, the first thing you do is go over to Earlham to find out that there are students who have family there still who are visiting here and attending classes, and so it does have remarkable international connections. Was that true as much when you were in school here?
I think it certainly was true, and again give Landrum credit for it, because foreign study was something that was offered even in the mid-1960s when I was a student. Unfortunately for me, I didn't take advantage of it, and I probably should have. It's one of the great regrets of but I always was working, so
a lot of us remember that.
So I had to stay in Richmond, but because I needed the money from the jobs, but it's truly a wonderful thing. I was just speaking yesterday with a student who spent a semester in Tanzania, and what a tremendous impact that had on her life, and has really shaped what she wants to do career-wise. And it really is a phenomenal opportunity that not very many colleges offer.
Yeah, it really
I remember
is.
one parent of an Earlham student said to me once after her son had come back, she said, you know, we sent him away as a boy, he came back a man. Mm-hmm. He had matured so much by being thrust into that foreign situation. He learned so much about the culture and so on, but he also grew up as a real adult as he faced the kind of things you have to deal with when you travel abroad.
Now, what was there in your own experience, and Gatch is mentioning that you had a major role in kind of expanding that influence globally. What was there in your own background that said, hey, we need to, this is part of an education experience, we need to get...
Well, before I came to Earlham, I'd been a war correspondent in World War I. Yeah. That was one thing. I'd traveled in Europe even before the war, but then I spent the last period of the war as a war correspondent in the Mediterranean, and spent the last winter of the war with Tito's troops in Yugoslavia, and then after the war, I spent 2 years as a foreign correspondent in Berlin. So I had that background when I came to Earlham. That it seems to me that at that time, I thought, well, we need to try to open up foreign study opportunities for our students. And we had already before that, of course, there was opportunity for people to sort of take a year abroad. Meant for most people that they would drop out of Earlham for a year and then go to Paris, which was a favorite place to go, and spend a year. But very few people could do that or would do that. And so instead of having maybe 2 or 3 a year who would take a foreign study program of that sort, go and attach themselves to some foreign university, we decided, well, why don't we set up a program of our own, and we'll send a faculty member and maybe a faculty couple with the students, and he can supervise the operation. He can make sure that the work is getting done properly, And that's how it all developed, that we decided to move from the scheme of just having an individual enroll in a foreign university, that we would develop our own program abroad. And we've done that now. We started in France, we did it in Germany, in Italy, in England, and then we developed a very extensive program in Japan. That's been one of Earlham's special developments, has been the very strong cultivation that we have carried through in our relations with Japan. We have Japanese students coming to Earlham every year. We send a group of students from Earlham to Japan. And one interesting thing is out of that experience, we developed a relationship with the school system in Japan, where they invited some of the graduates of that program at Earlham to come back and be an assistant to teaching English in the high schools in Japan. So this relationship with Japan is a very deep one and continuing one over many years.
That is impressive.
I'd like to backtrack just a little bit and pick up on something you said about your own experience, because I'm curious about it as a journalist. You were in post-war Berlin, correct?
Right.
And I would just like to hear a little more about that experience and what was going on at that time and your impressions of it.
Well, you know, I came to Earlham for my first interview for this job directly from Berlin. I was in Berlin at the time of the Berlin blockade, when the Russians tried to prevent us having anything to do with Berlin. They were trying to expel us from Berlin. And we wouldn't, the American military, of course, weren't going to stand for that. And so General Clay, who was the head of our American military operation in Berlin, organized an airlift, and we had planes flying from Frankfurt into Berlin on a 24-hour basis, and a plane taking off every 2 or 3 minutes. And we hauled sacks. I sat on sacks of coal being hauled from West Germany into Berlin. Well, that was one of the big stories of that day. And Rotary International asked me, I'd done some speaking for Rotary, asked me if I would come and do a lecture series around the country on the Berlin blockade. And in the course of that lecture tour that I did for about 7 weeks, I came to Earlham, was interviewed, and was offered the job to come to the faculty, which I did the following year. But the occupation of Germany by the Americans, British, French, and Russians is a fascinating thing. In Berlin, of course, we were exposed to the Russians because they had control of a part of Berlin, and then the Russians division, the Russian zone of Germany, was entirely under their control. So we got a very close-up view of how the Russians operate and how they try to change the economic political system. So I would say that my experience in Berlin was one of the most educational experiences of my whole life, because I saw military operations, I saw military administration. One of the most interesting men I ever met was General Lucius Clay, who was the head of the American military government. And he had a very interesting way of operating. He would be at his office at 7 o'clock every morning, and from 7 to 9, he had no advance appointments. If you wanted to see General Clay, come and get in line at 7 o'clock in the morning, and he would see you. And he was an amazing man like that. Now, one of the most angry, contentious issues between the West countries and the Russians was over the admission of students to the University of Berlin. The University of Berlin actually was across the line inside Russian-controlled territory, and they would not allow the German students from the American zone, the British zone, or the French zone to attend the university. And they kept stalling about this. And finally, one of my friends, a journalist who'd spent a lot of time in Germany before the war, had a brilliant idea, and he went to see General Clay one morning, early, as I said. He said, "General, I know how long you've been fighting with the Russians over admission of West Germans to the University of Berlin. I've got an idea for you. why don't you open a new university inside the western sectors of Berlin? There's a great number of German scholars, professors scattered over the world, fled from Hitler Germany. They'd gladly come back and be professors here. You could build up a new university inside West Berlin. General Clay listened to this, picked up the phone, talked to somebody, said, have you done such and such with such a concern? Hung up. He said, I've got your campus for you. Now, General Clay made a decision, a split decision within 10 minutes. He didn't discuss it. He didn't have a committee talk about it. He said, it's a good idea, and we're going to do it, and right now I make the decision. I never saw a man who could operate in such with such clarity and such decisiveness as this man. He was an amazing administrator.
What was happening in German society in those post-Hitler times?
Well, lots of things were happening. They of course, there was a great sense of guilt among many of the Germans about what had gone on. They were ashamed of their history. I think a lot of them felt we'll never be redeemed. We've made such a mess of our country, and what we did with the Jews is unforgivable. How will we ever get out of this? But on the other hand, I think the way in which the occupation was handled was really extraordinarily successful. The Americans didn't try to dominate everything. We tried to encourage local self-government, but right away we ran into corruption problems, and I remember writing a series of articles about West German new governments that were corrupt. And General Clay saw this series of articles, and he asked me, he said, you've done a very interesting and useful job of writing up that series of articles on corruption in West Germany, but I'd like to dig more deeply into that. And you as a reporter can go out and probably get things in ways that maybe we officially have problems. Would you take leave for a while and go out and dig out some more material about this? So I did. And now we had a supervision, the power over the development of government, but we were trying to push the people to take responsibility, and we got out of it, in a very short time. But it was a very interesting experience to see what a military government could do in helping a country to rebuild itself.
Had you ever witnessed anything like the rebuilding of, when you think about how they rose from those ashes to again become world powers, Japan and Germany? Well,
both the Germans and the Japanese are very industrious people. That's the first thing I have to say. They're well organized. The Germans are marvelous organizers and have great technical skill and background. So they had the technical human resources to rebuild. There's no doubt about that. And they worked very hard to try to develop democratic governments, and I think they've been very successful in making the bridge to democracy after this terrible dictatorship that they had for so long. All right, we want to talk a little bit here about another subject that's been very, very much in the news, and I want to engage all of you in that conversation, but certainly the Middle East. There are probably long periods that could go by where people would say, that's Afghanistanism in journalism. You and I know that phrase, when something seems so distant that it had no relevance. Obviously, some of the most distant places of the Middle East right now are making headlines every day. And Landrum, I can't think of anybody who would be more knowledgeable about that, but what do we make of the fact that not only countries that may have been typically tied to violence or this sort of thing, but for Egypt and other countries to be falling under the kind of revolutions going on there, what do we make of all of it? Well, I think the main thing that we can say about it is that even the most repressive dictatorial regimes have within themselves seeds of their own destruction. And these countries that are now undergoing dramatic transitions are countries that have been, where they've had leadership sitting on top of their population and holding them down in all sorts of ways. And after a while, the people just have enough. And of course, as the stories in the paper show up again and again, there's a whole new generation of young people growing up all across the world with their connections through the media, through the internet, through Twitter.
Is this a social media revolution?
It's
in
a
many
social.
ways?
It definitely is a social media revolution, and it's one thing. It's hard to keep people from being acquainted with what's going on elsewhere now.
Right.
People can communicate with other people all around the world instantaneously. This is a revolution, and when young people in Egypt, for example, can get on the internet and communicate with people in other countries and see what life is like there, they begin to see that life doesn't have to go on the way it has been for them. So I think that we're seeing an extraordinary revolution in attitudes, and it is certainly true that over a period of years, these Eastern European, these Near Eastern countries and Africa and the Middle East have been subjected to the most extreme kind of control, and people are fed up with it, and they're breaking out. Now, I would not have predicted that it would have happened this way, but Egypt was a very well-controlled country. President Nasser was an army officer. He created a revolution, got rid of the old corrupt King Farouk. And then he was succeeded by Sadat, who was another military man. And then Sadat was assassinated by an extremist of his own people, and he was succeeded by another military man, Mubarak. Well, Mubarak was a very greedy man, a very dictatorial person. He had no interest whatsoever in a democratic government. He controlled Egypt. He manipulated it completely, and he was able to get a tremendous amount of money. They still don't know how many billions of dollars this man got stashed away, money that he'd taken out of what belonged to the Egyptian people. And one thing which I don't see anybody talking about, one of the things that's bolstered his regime over the years was he had a very close tie with the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. And we were giving his government, something like $3 billion a year, most of it for military aid, in order to help Egypt be in a kind of dominant position in case the more radical movements were going to develop. And also we were very anxious, of course, to have an Arab country that was not going to be a threat to Israel. And the United States played a major role in negotiating the deal, the peace. President Carter took the initiative to bring Begin and Sadat together and more or less push them into making a peace. So here you had, the Middle East was still turbulent. There was still a great deal of hatred of Israel. But here was Egypt with the largest, biggest, most powerful military unit in the Arab world. We got them out of the confrontation lineup against Israel. And in order to keep Egypt on this basis, we undertook to give them a lot of economic aid. And so two of the biggest recipients of American economic aid over the last 40 years have been Israel and Egypt. And since we were trying to buy peace for the Middle East by keeping Egypt and Israel on a friendly basis. But where did all that money go? I'm sure that a good many of those billions that were given to Egypt wound up in Mubarak's pocket. Mm-hmm. He's supposed to have squirreled away something like $80 billion and made him one of the richest men in the world. And a dictatorial man. And he wanted his son, he's been in power for 30 years, and he wanted his son to become his successor. Well, the mass of the Egyptian people didn't like that. They didn't want that at all. But they didn't feel they could stand up against him. He controlled the military, he controlled the police, he controlled the media, he controlled all the political arms of the government. But here you had this mass uprising of young people with their computers and their cell phones and their Twitters and so on. And it's just one of the most amazing stories in my lifetime. This grassroots revolution in the Arab countries, Muslim countries of the Middle East.
There could be no more Iron Curtains, can there?
No, the Iron Curtain era is over.
Yeah, I'm wondering, you spoke there about the U.S. government's relation with Egypt especially, and I'm wondering if you have any predictions. You know, it's very hard to tell now, even now, what the future of governments like in Egypt and Tunisia, where we've seen these nonviolent revolutions powered by young people. I don't know what these governments are going to look like. I was wondering if you have any predictions on that, and what their relation will be with the United States, because it seems like they've really taken control and acted really in their own accord, without a lot of outside pressures on them.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing is you raise a question, I think, very important one. I think part of this revolution is we want to stand on our own feet. We are Egyptians. One of the things that came up during the period of this turmoil in Cairo was the use of the term dignity, independence. We want to be independent. We want to reclaim our country. We want to be sure that everybody understands we are Egyptians. And I think there's a kind of nationalism there, but I think in many ways a very healthy kind of nationalism. Now it's going to create some tensions with the United States, I think. And certainly it's creating tension with Israel. Israel is really scared to death right now about maybe major changes throughout the Middle East in regard to their own relations with their neighbors. Now, I don't think the Egyptians are going to tear up their peace treaty with Israel. I think that's a big issue that comes up again and again. Will a new government in Egypt want to tear up the peace treaty with Israel? And the Israelis are worried about that. Well, I don't think there's a chance at all. Some years ago, my wife and I made a trip around the world, and we stopped off in Egypt and met with some of my friends there. And one weekend, we were with a family who had a villa down on the Mediterranean coast, and there were young people there for the weekend, university students. And I asked them, what about your attitude toward Israel? Are you see more warfare with Israel? They'd already at that time been through wars with Israel. And they said, oh, no, we've had enough of this. We don't want any more war with Israel. We let them live their life. We live ours. We have nothing to do with another war. No way do we want to see a war with Israel. And I think that's basically been true of the people for a long time. So I don't think there's any, I think the Israelis can relax on that point. Egypt is not going to tear up the peace treaty.
But how about Iran? Now, I have heard that they may be fomenting some of this unrest.
Well, of course, the Iranians they're looking for opportunities to get in somehow to have more influence in the Arab world. The Iranians are, first of all, they're not Arab. Most people don't understand that. They're Persian. They speak a different language. They write a different script. They have different political objectives. But they're very proud people. They're very highly advanced people. This is one of the great civilizations of the world. The Chinese civilization and the Persian civilization were the two oldest civilizations on the earth. And the Iranians are very proud of their past and their culture and so on. And we've had, unfortunately, this terrible situation where for more than 35 years the United States has no diplomatic relations with Iran after they took those hostages way back years ago. And the Iranians are trying to get back in the game. They have ambitions. Now the big quarrel about the atom bomb. They say they want to develop the use of atomic energy for power purposes. Well, every country wants to do that, but I have no doubt they also would like to get the atom bomb, and it's a serious problem in that part of the world because. And people keep saying, well, we mustn't allow the atom bomb to be introduced to the Middle East. The atom bomb is already there. The Israelis have it. The Israelis have had the atom bomb for 25 years. They've got probably 200 or 300 atom bombs ready to go. And so you talk to the Iran, well, you can't have the atom bomb. Well, Israel has the atom bomb. Why, if Israel's going to have the atom bomb, why can't we have one too?
But is a threat that it might fall in the hands of groups as opposed to governments?
Well, that's also possible. But I mean, I don't think there's another. I don't think Al Qaeda has the capability of, moving far beyond this, and I don't see any other groups going up. But there are, you do have fanatical terrorist groups that will do crazy and violent things, and the making of peace between the Israelis and their Arab neighbors is one of the most important foreign policy issues in the world. If you try to say, what are the American foreign policy objectives in the world? One of them has to be to promote peace between the Israelis and their Arab neighbors. That's got to be very top, high priority concern for the United States, because that conflict has gone on for all these many years. It's still not settled, and it disturbs the whole region, and it threatens the peace of the world. That we can't put up with that forever. And how it's to be done, I'm not sure, because there's this constant back and forth between the two sides. It's a very complex thing.
One question just following up on that, your involvement, long-term involvement in the Middle East affairs have also put you very much in close proximity with some pretty powerful people. You, I believe, somebody, is it by legend, correct me if I'm wrong, but Yasser Arafat had your name on his cell phone, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know about that. You're telling me something I never heard before.
Okay. President Carter.
Well, I did have a lot of contact with President Carter about these matters. I had contacts with George H.W. Bush. I had discussions with him about the Middle East. I got involved way back in, particularly after the Six-Day War of 1967. From 1968 to this day, I've been deeply involved in the Israeli-Palestinian issue, and traveling back and forth. I lived for 4 years in Jerusalem at one point, and I carried messages back and forth between Washington and that region again and again. And so, yes, I got to know personally King Hussein, for example, Sadat, Israel's President Weizmann. I'll tell you one story about Weizmann and Sadat. I went to see, Weizmann was the founder of the Israeli Air Force. During World War II, he enlisted in the Royal Air Force in Britain, was trained as a pilot. When he got out and got back to Israel, he helped to create the beginnings of the Israeli Air Force. And then he rose to be defense minister, and finally he was made president of the country. Well, when he was defense minister, I know him. I called him up and said I'd like to come have a visit. And he said, well, meet me at the Prime Minister's office on Sunday. So I did. And he comes out, he said, meet me at noon at the Prime Minister's office. I'll go there. I knew that they had a cabinet meeting every Sunday morning. And I thought, my goodness, they may not be, but anyway, I'll be there. But why is he willing to do it this way? Well, anyway, I'm there, and he comes in promptly at noon, walks in the door, and he says, he's shaking his hands over his head. Boy, am I glad to get out of that meeting. he said, here we are. Sadat came here, held out his hand to Begin to make peace, and Begin, he's talking about his prime minister that he serves under. Sadat comes and offers him his hand. And Sadat and Begin offers him his little finger, is the way he put it. He said he's letting the best chance for peace go down the drain. I can't believe my ears. I'm hearing the defense minister talking to me in the prime minister's office and bad-mouthing his boss. But anyway, he became very good friends with Sadat. And another time I went to see him, and he said, Sadat and I hit it off very well, and if we had had a chance to settle this thing, we could have settled this thing in 30 days. And And then it just happened that I went on from there to Cairo, and I had a visit with President Sadat. And I said to Sadat, you know, I just had a visit with your friend President Weizmann in Israel the other day, and he said that if you two had such a rapport, and you both saw what peace could do for both people, and you wanted to do it, and if you had had the freedom to do it, you could have settled it in 30 days. And Sadat pulled back. 30 days, he said. No, not 30 days, 30 hours we could have done
it. I wanted to get back to current affairs because of what's going on in the news right now in terms of not just the uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, but Libya and Yemen, which are of tremendous concern, and especially what posture should the United States be taking at this point? It seems that to an outside observer like me who has no expertise that you know, almost anything you do in this situation is wrong. And
That's not far from the truth.
I'm just kind of wondering what your views are on what's taking place right now, especially vis-a-vis Libya.
Well, you know, the U.S. government really doesn't know what to do, honestly. I think there are no good choices there. Obviously, we felt that we couldn't stand by and allow this terrible man, Gaddafi, to go and murder the people in Benghazi. And so at the last minute, we decided to just go for this no-fly zone thing. And we spent days, apparently, negotiating with the NATO powers, with the Arab League, with you know, all kinds of people, try to get agreement. Now that took time. People saying, well, if we were going to do anything, we should have done it 2 weeks ago. Well, okay, but how to get people to move when you're trying to build a coalition? It does take time to do that, and but then you can say, well, you come in at the last minute, and this revolt is not really succeeding, and well, the choices are bad in every direction you go. I'm not sure. You know, we're having a big debate now in the Congress about this. Should the Congress have been consulted more about this? Well, I asked about this just the other day in Washington, and I was told, well, it's nonsense to say that the Congress are not consulting. The White House had endless conversations with the leadership of the Congress day after day about what was to be done. They didn't ask for a vote by the Congress, too, which they probably should have done. But in any case, there's been a lot of discussion of what should be the American position here. And I don't think anybody's come up with any foolproof answer as to what should be done. We decided that we go and help get this no-fly zone started, and because we had ships, we had planes, we had missiles available, we could act in a hurry, where it would take several days to get NATO operated. So if we were going to do anything, it obviously fell upon the United States to do something now. And we did it, but we made it very clear we're not going to continue in this. We're not going to put any boots on the ground. And certainly I don't think the American public would stand to have another Army operation on the ground in Libya with two other wars already going on. No, I wish I could give you some thoughtful analysis that think it made any sense, but I just don't. I don't know where we're going in this thing. And it's very clear that. Well, there was a very interesting article in the New York Times the other day by Tom Friedman saying that he just prayed and hoped that Obama will turn out to be lucky on this. The only thing he had to say was he just hoped that there was an element of good luck that will somehow come to the fore. That's a poor way to make a judgment about foreign policy. But
what is the impact in the Middle East of the seeming inconsistencies in U.S. policy, where we will, for example, go into Libya, but not Yemen?
Richard Lugar had expressed his reservations based on that. You know, what is our policy if we'll support one regime but not another one that's, you know...
Well, it's a very fair question. I think it's a very fair question. And, Well, you know, Senator Lugar's been raising a number of interesting questions about this thing, and I think quite rightly so. He's calling us to go back and look at the Constitution, which says wars are made on declaration by the Congress. Now, we've had a succession of presidents back for a number of years that have gone to war without asking for congressional approval, or they went ahead and started it and then they asked for approval. I'm on Senator Lugar's side in saying that we ought to be more careful about how we interpret the Constitution with regard to how you get into a war. And I know that from personal conversations with Lugar, he was deadly opposed to our going to that war in Iraq. I sat with him one evening and talked about this. He said, and months before we went to war in Iraq, he said, I don't think that the administration, this is George W. Bush's administration, I don't think this administration is calculating accurately and carefully what this is going to cost us. What it's going to cost us in money, what it's going to cost us in lives, what it's going to cost us in standing in the world. I don't think we're calculating what it's going to cost us to get into that war. We shouldn't be going into that. That was Lugar. Now, he didn't say this publicly. He didn't say this in the Congress. But that was his personal view. And he was right. He was absolutely right. We had no business going into that war.
And in your view, we can look at that war and its outcome and some of the consequences, but what do you see as really the long-term effects of what we did there?
Well, it remains to be seen. One of the most important questions to raise, it brings us back to Iran. The winner of our war in Iraq to this day is Iran. We have not won the war in Iraq. Iran has won the war in Iraq.
Because they'd been at war for a long time.
Iran and Iraq spent 8 years in one of the bloodiest wars of the 20th century. It was finally ended. They're now being reconciled. A majority of the Muslims of Iraq are Shiites. The Iranians are the principal Shiite country power in the world. Iran has always wanted to have influence in Iraq because of this shared religious orientation. Now, many of the leaders in Iraq today have spent years in exile in Iran. They are very close to the Iranian leadership. And today, Iran's influence in the political parties that run the government of Iraq is very great. Now, in one sense, Iran is sitting in the cockpit, they're sitting in a very comfortable position in regard to this whole thing. Now, will that continue for a long time? The Iraqis obviously won't, they're not going to put themselves under the control of Iran, but the influence that Iran has is very considerable, and now that will continue, I think. Now, it is possible that a genuine democratic government is going to get well established there. It's very difficult because you've got Kurds, you've got Sunnis, and you've got Shiites. And these three elements of the Iraqi people have many conflicts among them. And that's not going to easily disappear. But I think what we've done in the last 2 or 3 years, as we've wound down the military operation, helping the government to get started, helping develop the economy, I think there's a good fighting chance that Iraq may turn out to be a success story in the end. But the honest truth is we're going to have to live with a situation in which Iran is a very influential neighbor of Iraq.
And that's been one of our problems. I mean, the current volatility aside, there's been kind of a knowledge gap about the Middle East.
Oh, my goodness, yes. And we have such a simplistic view about the Middle East, and it's a complex part of the world. But it is I think the most hopeful thing to me, again, it gets back to this question of the youth revolution. That has tremendous potential if that can be directed in the right way. Now, there are a lot of factions are going to be trying to grab hold of power as this change takes place. But if they can somehow get through this transition period and begin to build genuinely democratic institutions, I think they can take root. And I don't despair about this. Look at what's happened in Japan and Germany over the years. Germany went from this terrible dictatorship to a genuine democracy. It went away from antagonism and internal hatred against the French. The French and the Germans are among the closest allies in the world today. And how did this come about? Well, finally people decided that war is no answer, that you've got to find a way of building friendship among peoples. And the Germans and the French have done it.
We're coming into our closing couple minutes here, and we started out local, so I kind of want to end on a local note. I had a question that was asked of me, and I want to pass on to you. You've served for many years on one of the most important foundations in Indiana, the Eli Lilly Foundation. Talk a little bit about the importance of foundations to local growth, local organization, communities.
Well, I have a great belief in the central value in our society of what we would call the non-governmental organizations, the NGOs of the world, the foundations, the private associations that are promoting various good causes and health and whatever else. And we have now in Wayne County, I know, we have a county foundation that brings together people who pool their gifts for charitable purposes. I think that's a wonderful thing. Well, when I was at Lilly Endowment, one of the things that we did was to encourage the development of these community foundations. And Lilly made funds available to help fund the organization of these community foundations all over the state of Indiana. And I think that was a very useful thing for the life of the community, and for the state as a whole. And so I believe that while we inevitably talk a lot about politics, and we talk about international affairs, and we talk about war and peace, but getting a decent life and improving the quality of life where we live, that's got to be done to a large extent locally and by local institutions. And the private associations, the private non-profit associations, and the private for-profit corporations and the foundations have to be linked together with a vision of what you can do to build a good community and to build a good life. They are vital.
I think I speak for everybody at this table when I say we could probably go on easily for another hour, because it's been a delight to discuss these several issues. Howell Gatchell, I want to thank you so much. Things going well at the radio station at Earlham?
They're getting better every day.
That's good. That's good. And Micah Summer, you graduated in May, is that correct?
I do. I'm doing a May term in Italy, so I'll participate in commencement, but I won't actually get my diploma until I finish the May term.
Great.
But that's exciting.
We've enjoyed your work with the Palladium item, and Landrum Bolling, always great to see you. We were talking some East Tennessee connections that we shared this morning, and it's just a delight always to talk to you.
I'm always pleased to be able to be in Richmond and be with people that I know and admire.
Well, when you're in town again, we'll do this again.
Okay.
Thank you so much, and again, for joining us in this taped PI Live, which will be shown, I believe, in the later part of this month. But and join us again, part of our ongoing election coverage. Until then, thank you all, and thank you very much, Landrum.